Hello and welcome to my channel! My name is Reka and this is the final part of my Nexo Knights character ranking videos. If you haven't already, make sure to watch the first 3 parts too, to see how we got here. Now we only have 2 tiers left from the 7. Absolute OK and Masterpiece. So in shorter form, the good ones. The Absolute OK characters are Absolute OKs, whatever that means for them. I'll try to explain it later when we're talking about the characters. But it's important to know that they aren't the same. They become okay by being good at what they're supposed to do, because you can't expect the same thing from a main character and a random side character. This attitude can be seen at every level of the ranking, but it is particularly important here. I don't think I have to detail the meaning of masterpiece. These characters are great, not just in Nexo Knights, but in general, if we look through similar series. And makes me ask, how can everything else be so bad? But that question can wait, because we have to start the Absolute OK characters, and the first one is Lance Richmond. I get it, he's an interesting case. Many of you may ask, how he could get up here? But I really think that he's at least a tolerably functioning character. Probably even better. For this, I think I should detail how this fascinating systemization system of mine works. I put on this level those who do something in a quite appropriate way, or at least there's little to criticize in it. The painfully wasted characters are doing something too, but that something is horribly done. And the could have been great barely do anything, though they should/could. Lance doesn't fit into any of these two, because he definitely does something, and even if it's not perfect, it's not bad enough to ruin his whole character. So he got here, and I'm quite fine with this, because he kinda got his job done. And what was his job? Well, surprisingly many stuff. First of all, I believe that, at least from the 5 Knights, Lance is the most explained one. We get to know how and why he got to be the way he is in the series, thanks to his backstory, which turned out to be the best from the 5 Knights in my opinion too. And Lance, a descendant of a really wealthy ancient family who didn't want to be a knight. Before anything, let's take a look at the money aspect of this. Lance stands out from the other knights because of a lot of reasons, but one of those reasons is that he's rich. They even reflect on this once.
Just one family lives here? It's bigger than my whole town!
Or twice. But nothing differentiates Axel from Lance if we look at how people look at him, and he still got into the country's biggest, shiniest, and to my sincere regret, only school for knights. Macy's dad is the king, and though he doesn't have power, he sure has money. Clay is an orphan, but I'm pretty sure that in Merlok's person, he found a wealthy uncle. And Aaron was literally passed to the academy because of financial issues, like regulate him instead of us, thanks! And please say that I'm not the only one who waited in vain for the point where Halbert Richmond just blocks Lance's credit card. Seriously, his whole freak out in season 2, episode 2 becomes hilarious when you realize that it's not his money. But he doesn't want to just sit around, do nothing. No. He wants to become an actor. I will come back to the acting part, but first, I have to complain. There's this small annoying detail, and this is the fact that as a kid, Lance hated that they do everything instead of him. This is pretty logical for a kid, since they are naturally curious and adventurous. What I don't see is where and why this is changed in him, since going to the academy offered him some kind of freedom, so he could have been himself there. I could explain this by that in the academy he already wears a mask, so no one will know how badly he doesn't want to be there, and he probably took up his family's "we're better than everyone else" attitude, so he doesn't have to try really hard, probably. And if he would be himself, he'd be more like everyone else. But I'm just speculating. Though it's true indeed that from what I saw, I think Lance did like to be rich, simply because that was always the default for him. Apart from this little turnaround in his personality, everything is perfect. Lance's parents still easily win the most toxic parents ever prize. Oh, and who knows for how many centuries they have been buying their ways into the academy. Also, it's interesting that the series spent so much time with Macy's dad and planned to spend so much time with Clay's mom, but not with Lance's parents, though I really think they should have got much more screen time. At least they appeared here for a longer time. I'd like to highlight what Cuthbert said to Lance while some squire bots drag him up to a holo train.
I don't want to be a knight!
You will learn, Lance, that giving up your dreams is what's expected of all Richmonds. Standing in life is everything.
I have no intention of excusing them for their parenting scenes. I think there are points where things get unforgivable regardless of the circumstances. But it's thought-provoking how many generations of trauma his parents pegged into Lance. No, it doesn't dispense them, it can't, and I'm 100% sure that they will never realize that, oops, they screwed it up. But their kids can do that, and this chance makes Lance much deeper. And it raised a question in me. When Lance started to enjoy being a knight, he stood in the line and gave up his dream? Or he just learned to balance passion and work? Maybe he found a new dream? I'll let you decide. Going back to the academy, Lance probably got one of the most screen time, and no, I don't have any problem with it, especially since this turned out great too. And you may want to remember to this detail because it will be important later. And as I also mentioned it regarding to Macy, we got the playing a knight concept with Lance too. But here, Brickland used this to make Lance do what he has to. I was happy to see that they managed to give Brickland a scene that portrayed him as a competent and caring teacher. And then when they talk about how bad Jestro is in, well, everything, Lance says to him that at least he can play a knight, but Jestro can't even do that. For which he gets scolded by Clay, of course.
You think I'm bad, Lance? Well, yes. I mean, at least I can act like a knight. You can't even do that. You think you can act like a knight? Well, here's a clue. It's not about acting like a knight. It's about being a knight. Got it? Jestro, wait up. Jestro?
Who wrote this scene and where were they while the writing of season 1? Oh, and there's also a scene which I just simply adore when Lance and Aaron talk crap about Clay. It's just perfect, really. I can't say anything else.
Sorry, guys. I already joined a tournament team. That guy? He's always buddying up with princess. Yeah, all he ever does is polish his sword. He's not even of noble birth. He's a commoner. It's terrible. No offense intended. None taken.
And this part doesn't go further than that to kick Lance towards knighthood. Thank God! It's the actual series' job to do. This is just a backstory. The point is to build up a base for the characters to grow, not to do it instead of the actual story. Do you agree with me, Knights of the Realm? Yeah, Lance just starts his journey, and he hasn't changed that much till the present, since knighthood still isn't his top priority. It's such a shame that apart from Jestro and Lance, the Knights of the Realm didn't even try to give a base for the characters by showing us where their flaws come from. And what did Lance did with his base? Become as dividing as Moses when he sees a sea. It's a fact that he doesn't do anything significant to solve the main conflict, just like everyone else. The main conflict is the threat of Jestro and the Book of Monsters, but no one can solve that. Not just because they pretty dependent on Nexo powers, but also every problem could be solved if Merlok would deign to open his stupid digital mouth. This is as hopeless as it is. So, like with kinda everyone else, the main question regarding to Lance is what he does apart from fighting. And oh boy, he does a lot of stuff. First of all, he's outrageous and unpleasant, which makes the series much less boring. Yes, I can't believe it either, but Jürgen literally defined his role at one point.
So much of what they do is so boring. Cannot one of these persons be outrageous and unpleasant?
If there's a need for some conflict within the team, Lance is the obvious answer, even if he has some character development. Like I said it back in part 1 regarding to Axel, no matter who ends up next to him, Lance provokes an intense reaction from everyone and easily attracts the attention. Even if he doesn't have epic battles in season finals, you couldn't just write him off easily, unlike someone else, because he exists in a spectacular and inimitable way. He's a striking phenomenon in the dialogues too, and it's pretty commendable that I can't even think of one line of his that could be said by someone else without anyone noticing it. His personality permeates every action, joke, or simply sentence of his. I know in general Nexo Knights is quite great in this, but I think Lance is a good example. Thanks to this, he's pretty consistent and actually adds some plus to the show. And I swear, he's the most used character. I present you my stunning discovery. The Lance side plot phenomenon. I did a little math, and there are 19 episodes at least where Lance got a side plot or even just a recurring joke or something, which is the most by far. Heck, even Clay didn't get that much. And is this a problem? I don't think so. Maybe if you really can't stand Lance. These little detours are never in the way, always entertaining, and they not just help Nexo Knights' sacred mission given by God himself, but the story too. A kind reminder. Without Lance, Season 3 Episode 10 never would have happened, because what started this series of important events?
This is a disaster! The worst day I or the kingdom has ever experienced!
And the Knights wouldn't even escape from the mine alive without a Lance side plot. Oh, and I think it's worth to mention that if I'd have to choose one favorite episode from every season, 3 from 4 would be a more Lance-centered episode. Plus, even though we don't know much about the story of Season 5, it's sure that even there, Lance had a side plot, spanning multiple episodes and actually attributing to the main story. This is about this Lance skincare product line, which turns out to be able to turn people invisible for a longer or shorter time. And later, probably around the season final, it helps knights to sneak into enemy territory. And they plan to start to build it up in the very first episode. I really don't want to list every single episode, but it's important to see how Lance's character works perfectly, no matter in what context he is. Every time he has a conversation with Clay is a celebrational event. He had a chili eating race with Aaron, argued with Axel over a D&D game, and Macy... They have disappointingly few scenes together, but for example, when they went together to the west to find Clay, they worked pretty well together. They really have a uniquely outstanding dynamic.
That soggy berg? Who cares? You think? It's one thing for Clay to be tricked into attacking us, but now he's hurting the poorest, saddest, and most barefoot people in the land!
And pairing Lance with the Cowboy Grey Knight was a smart choice. Furthermore, even though his calendar is full, because no matter what little push the story needs, the writing team shouts his name to save the day, in my eyes, from the 5 Knights, he's the real comic relief of the show. And I don't know how striking it is based on my previous statements, but I appreciate when someone/something makes me laugh. And for me, Lance is funny. As I see, a good amount of the series' humor comes from him. This is helped by the fact that most of his remarks and actions have a certain humorous undertone in general too. Because Nexo Knights makes no secret of the fact that Lance isn't exactly a pleasant person. We have, for example, the whole Season 1 Episode 6. He got on everyone's nerves the whole time by being an egoistic asshole. Not even mentioning bribing an orphan with donating to an orphanage. Though it's true that the said orphan did let to bribe himself. But at the end, he got what he deserved, and it's perfect that way. And it's not the only time. Oh, Lance's character development. I swear it actually exists, it's just the writers aren't really good at this. They managed to scrape together one perfect character arc for Jestro in the first 2 seasons, and it is wonderful, can't wait to talk about it. But even after that, they decided to pull the handbrake and back up on a long way. Character writing is definitely not the strength of Nexo Knights, but at least regarding to Lance, I clearly see the endeavor. We have his relationship with his parents, which makes an interesting parallel with his relationship to knighthood. Sadly, they kept it short, and everything kinda happened under 4 sentences. Yes, not too much, but has a beginning and an end, which is much more than what other character arcs have here. So, this arc is thrown in our lap in Season 2, Episode 2 with a simplified backstory for which I'm pretty grateful, because I'm pretty sure I was at least 17 when I not just watched the Knights of the Realm, but also understood what they say. The point is, the does Lance want to be a knight question gets answered briefly but completely.
But why do I have to be a knight?
Because that's what a Richmond is supposed to do.
But I want to be an actor and a celebrity.
But you're going to be a knight, and that's final. We are happy you're a knight, and have good taste in friends.
What we're trying to say, Lancelot, is that it's good to be home.
Well, Mother, I didn't think I'd say this, but it's good to have you home. And this whole knight thing has been growing on me, sort of.
I have to admit, it wouldn't have been bad if we would have seen how Lance finds happiness and purpose in being a knight. We saw some change, because, for example, he accepted Clay's leadership. Twice in a row, because the plot of Season 1, Episodes 3 and 4 are basically the same. The execution of orders and proper performance of duties are the bare minimum, but we also clap for Lance, because, well, he's Lance. So this development was actually part of the show at some way. Or it would have been boring if Lance questions Clay for the 4th time in the season. Whatever, facts are facts, Lance not just accepted Clay, but Aaron too. Although Aaron was chosen by Clay, his legitimacy comes from Clay, so I believe here Lance only accepted Clay's decision. I really like that theory. And when it became clear that Aaron can't handle everything, Lance questioned him too, in his usual egocentric way. Even if it wasn't perfect or useful, it was still totally faithful to Lance. I think no one was surprised when he started this. If I wasn't that fixated on the fact that with some minimal efforts the writing could have been fantastic, I just shrugged my shoulders saying, it was funny. And I'd like to emphasize that the surprisingly darker Season 4, Episode 7 decided to relieve its depressive tone with a Lance side plot. Talkative. Just like the fact that he's an actor, cause oh my gosh, what an idea is that? And what a character Lance becomes if you look at him like someone whose whole personality is an act. A mask which he puts on to stand in the infinite lines of dreamless dreamers. And if he'd have to take that mask off, wouldn't he get an existential crisis? Because who is he really? Does anyone know? Does he know? I don't think he knows. Maybe this mask was off for a short time in Season 1, Episode 9 and 10. Yeah, time to talk about the Season 1 final. A long story short, Lance uses Dennis, his squire bot, as a doormat. Because of this, Dennis quits, no idea why, so Lance ends up alone and covered by dirt, and at the end, he adopts a pig. Don't misunderstand, I love Hamleta, but this doesn't have an ear nor a tail. With her, Lance didn't really learn that he should treat his employees better.
You are a PIG pig! I resign!
It would made much more sense if they emphasized that Lance can treat anyone the right way and can get close to anyone because he only cares about himself. And then here comes this pig, the first living being Lance cares about, and slowly he learns to love humans just as much. This message of Hamleta is kinda part of the series too, like that adorable detail that Lance washes her by himself.
Boring, right, Hamleta?
Oh, Lance, they've taken your parents!
Worse than that, they've taken all my gold! Will I have to live... Look, if you're gonna fawn over anyone, it really should be me. Hamletta, I was supposed to roll the blue-sided dice, right?
Ha! She agrees with me.
After all the times I protected you from becoming a ham sandwich! Well, the first one is free. I'll just need to collect some coinage for future billing.
Hey, big bro!
Hey, little sis.
Oh, there's Lance!
Well, hello, Alice. Have you met Hamletta?
But this really has nothing to do with Dennis. For that, it would have been enough if Lance has to get along by himself, which means that he actually does something and not just bathes in filth. So he can realize how easy his life is and learns to appreciate it. Instead of this, Dennis offered him a deal which says Lance has to clean up after Dennis and Hamletta once a week. My personal theory is that Lance didn't keep his promise and stopped it after 1 or 2 weeks. Whatever, so there are missing points, but Lance still puts down much more to the table than one can expect. I sure haven't thought at first that my opinion will be that positive about him. Of course I have further suggestions, because I missed one thing from Lance's development. A selfless act. They haven't done anything with his most exaggerated personality trait, that he's painfully ignorant towards everything that isn't related to him. He doesn't care about others' needs. His brain excludes everyone who can't serve with anything for him. Gosh, they even made a webisode about it. The point is, they should have made him sacrifice something, not for fame or to be praised for, but just because it's the right thing to do. That would have crowned his character development. But honestly, these mistakes are forgivable for me. Particularly significant argument for this is the fact that Lance is the only one whose character flaws are not only acknowledged by the series, but also does something with it. This shouldn't be considered an achievement, but here it is. Looking through the series, it really tried hard with him, and even if it didn't necessarily execute everything perfectly, at least there was an execution. All in all, I think he turned out to be a very entertaining character, not only with potential for further development, but also his base character is much more complex than a lot of characters, or at least more detailed. Whatever, the result is the same, and he never gets in the way of, say, a lesson, or coherence, or logical storytelling. This shouldn't be considered an achievement, but here it is. Whether you like him or not, he certainly evokes intense emotions from both the other characters and the viewers. And without him, this show wouldn't be the same for me, that's for sure. And the second character here is the Queen! Where should I start? My love towards history requires to mention that she was the first person of civilian origin who married into the royal family. The series has no intention to deal with the class differences on a deeper level, but still, it's an appreciable detail. They have an interesting dynamic with her husband. The reversal of traditional personality traits is not an epoch-making idea, but it still worked. In general, their marriage, based on what we saw, which is not much, is a working and happy thing, and I think we can accept this as a fact. As you may notice, Macy carries on her mother's legacy with being a knight, and at the same time, I think the Queen shows perfectly what Macy should become ideally. She balances perfectly her passion and her duty, unlike her daughter. First, she didn't give up fighting, and she's obviously in a great shape, but at the same time, she's feminine, elegant, commanding, and confident. And although I think it would fit into her character if she would act like that only because this is her duty, I think she's genuinely happy.
Good morning, Cleanington. I am your king.
You're wearing a crown, dear? Kind of gives it away.
She's not just handling the public and personal life perfectly, but she also has an absolutely healthy relationship with her family. Supportive but not favoring. During the whole knighting misery, she handled calmly both her husband's and her daughter's opinion. She was conciliatory all the way through and encouraged both to compromise and make sacrifices. Honestly, I'm a little sorry that they couldn't do more with her, but I also see that there wasn't enough time to make her deeper. And she turned out to be a fine supportive character. Although, it still would be great if we'd see how this kingdom is ruled, so we are not only satisfied with the fact that she is more competent than her husband, but we also see the proof of it. But yeah, she's a real girl boss who gives me hope, cause wow! This show managed to write a great female character! And here comes Roberto Arnoldi. He was a bright spot next to the returning villain duo in Season 3, especially since they really needed some fresh blood. As a sculptor, his role was completely self-evident and perfectly used. In Season 3 he was in 6 episodes, and he had something important to do every single time. Sadly, Season 4 had much less time for him, but let's be honest, it was crowded well enough to forgive this. And let's admit, he wasn't the most promising character ever. Yet they still managed to give him some other purpose than carving. In him, we got a new comic relief. Even better, a good comic relief. Thanks to the Italian accent, every line of his is entertaining and outstanding. For me, every second sentence of his is low-key iconic, especially in Hungarian. And I'm a great fan of puns, so that's another reason for me to like him better. And just in general, his jokes are funny, even when he doesn't talk about statues or gets insulted.
The car, she gets a flaky like a mama's pastry.
He also had a great chemistry with both Jestro and monstrox, so he didn't even get the role of the third wheel. And though he's not the most complex character in the universe, this fallen sculptor thing was pretty great. It gave Arnoldi a motivation and a backstory, and showed that even though the royal power is under a frog's butt, if someone falls out of favor with the king, they will fall out of favor with everyone. Good job! What a shame that the difference between Arnoldi's statues and everyone else's is invisible to human eye. So we only know that his works aren't beautiful because everyone says that. But they still achieve to tell us that Edward, the curator, is an inexpert expert.
Can you tell me how it got here?
Like all great statues, its origins are quite dramatic, though I could go on for hours.
I see. You could go on?
Yes, but I won't bore you with details. Simply know that that piece just ties the whole room together. Now, if you'll excuse me.
Here, an evil side character got an opponent, and the series easily gets you to root for Arnoldi.
The art is a lonely hunter. The bitter criticism, it cannot save you now.
Sorry, pardon me.
I can't deny I'm really biased when it comes to him, but he got his main job done perfectly, which was entertaining me. And the next is Jorah Tightward. He played well the role of a mini-villain. What makes him really interesting in my eyes is that his side plots are much funnier for the older audience than the 6-year-olds. Thanks to that, many times it's also much easier to take him seriously than the actual villains. In Season 1, Episode 4, they give a decent base for his character and instantly made the joke out of it. But they did it in a way that, if I think about it, I have to pick my jaw up from the floor.
Gold factory? Gold is mined from the ground. What exactly does your company do? Buy gold jewelry cheaply and sell it back to people at a huge profit?
Oh.
They said the word company and profit? Are we sure this is from Nexo Knights?
Impressive. And I'm not easily impressed.
Farmer, it's very ordinary. Aye.
Why?
And then in Season 2, Episode 4, they made it obvious that this guy isn't afraid to go against the king. Weak royal power. And this definitely older guy really wanted to kiss the not-so-old princess.
What?
Whatever, at least Jorah gave up on that. In Season 3, he was negligible, but in Season 4, wow, he really was in his element there. First of all, Nexo Knights isn't a fan of brutality. Understandably. But in Season 4, Episode 3, it made an exception. And not for the last time. Because yeah, Jorah threatened a bunch of poor locals with a granite knight who destroyed their homes completely so he can get ownership rights over the area. And they didn't even try to downplay this. Not even a bit. Hats off. And then in Season 4, Episode 6, he built a safe so others would put in their money, which he would keep. ridiculously brilliant. At least in a country where you can totally get away with this. And he had this speech about the money equals power thing, which makes sense. I wish they would have talked more about stuff like that. The only thing I waited for at this point was him openly turning against the king and attack him alongside the monsters. Yeah, Next Knights could easily bear a civil war. I'm joking. Kinda. But enough with the dreaming. Overall, I think Jorah is one of the most well-made side characters. Every time he appears, you can be sure that things will be funny. Personally, I'd really like to see what he could do in a more important role. And the last monster, Viparella. Specialized in scaring, she was the monster of the week in Season 1, Episode 5. But it doesn't mean that she's a lost case. First of all, take a look at the monster classification. The reason I put her below Lavaria is that she has common sense, while what Viparella knows is more specific. That's not a problem, but for me this order makes a bit more sense. And what makes her different, that although, just like most of the monsters, she got one episode with the spotlight, it was more than enough for her. She played an active role, even had more screen time here than Jestro in the Book of Monsters. We got to know her personality, and ironically, we learned what her greatest fear is. That she can scare someone. And then we saw her again in Season 1, Episode 9, and pairing her with Macy was a perfect choice. She already knew what Macy's greatest fear is, and brought it to life again, but this time for real. This attributed well to Macy's character development. Well, would have if the writers would have cared about it, but it's not Viparella's fault. She really did everything she could. So yeah, I think from the monster, she's the best written one. Doesn't try to be more than what she's supposed to be, a monster for an episode. But she got that job done perfectly. And the last one here... Dennis. The most questionable choice in this tier. I explain it in the end, but first let's look at his character. Even though he's Lance's squire bot, we didn't see him that much. In Season 1, Episode 9, he definitely did something. He went on strike. Honestly, it's so surprising that he can do that. I mean, it looks like he's basically the property of the Richmond family. Looks like he can say no to his owner without being melted down. Really, this is surprising. Anyway, here he served Lance's character development. For that, he would have been good if the writers could write. That's harsh, sorry. They just really didn't think that through. Whatever, Dennis did everything he could and proved that the squire bots feel just as much as humans. And then we skip Season 2 and in Season 3, he left. Wow. Yes, I said it 2 sentences before. Dennis has feelings. I say it again. Dennis has feelings. Here, one specific one. Adoration. Stupid English language. Why can't you have a right word for Rayongash? He's a fan. And the most important thing in my eyes is whose fan he is.
Whoa, Dennis, calm down. I didn't know you were such a fan of the bad boy bots.
Robot hoodlum. We know that Dennis served the Richmonds at least since Lance was a baby. So if he, as the servant of one of the richest families, adores a robot who steals from the rich that much, that tells you a lot about how he's treated. And even the knights are surprised by his fanatism. And then he joins the Merrymacs and doesn't really care about Lance. I wonder how Lance stayed alive without him for the rest of 1.5 seasons. So yeah, Dennis got his own story, which no longer served Lance's character, nor literally or metaphorically. That's what made his ranking difficult for me. He's not that forgettable next to the others I put on that level, but in Season 3 he wasn't a tool. He's certainly not a masterpiece, but he also doesn't have enough potential to be painfully wasted or could have been great but wasn't. And that's how he got here. And they were the absolute okay characters. Now we only have masterpieces. 3 to be exact. They are real mysteries for me, because how did they turn out to be this great? Whatever is the answer, I think they are in themselves give enough reason to not call Nexo Knights' writing hopeless. And let's start with Jestro, the evil number 1. Where should I begin? Perhaps a very interesting starting point is to ask, is Jestro even good at being bad? Or just, how bad is he really? The series gives us a formula for what it considers evil. This is embodied by the evil books. And it's not hard to admit that Jestro by himself doesn't really embody any of them. The emphasis is on the word by himself. And I think that's the key to Jestro's evilness, which definitely exists. After all, he has hurt a lot of people and destroyed and plundered a lot of villages, barely showing any regret. In fact, he got off very lightly for all of this. But if the Book of Monsters weren't behind him, if it weren't whispering in his ear, if it weren't encouraging him, guiding him, he would never have done any of this. It wouldn't even have crossed his mind. And for him, the whole thing was never about others, nor being evil, no matter what he did, mostly under the guise of revenge. The whole thing was a way to find a purpose for his existence, to see value in himself, to gain recognition, or at least respect. But in reality, he never truly got any of those things, even though he fought for them the whole time. In fact, his entire life. For as long as he can remember, he has seen failure in everything he tries, and while everyone else seems to have a predetermined path, something they're good at, something that makes them useful, he hasn't been given one. Instead, he juggles when he's nervous. That's how he ended up as a royal jester. Right from the very first moment when he just shone in the background, it's clear that he's clumsy. A more thought-provoking question is whether he's simply untalented to begin with or just suffers from stage fright. In my opinion, this is a self-perpetuating cycle, or rather, a loop. He made a mistake, which made him nervous the next time, causing him to make another mistake, and so on and so on. It doesn't help much that he doesn't seem to find a shred of joy in any of this. He simply does it because he has to. Or at least, that's what he believes. Except that this, too, ended up in cruel humiliation. It's actually interesting how the series combines the concept of the modern clown with royal jesters. These days, it's normal for a clown to trip over each other and act clumsy. That's what makes the audience laugh. But Jestro is supposed to do this through his acts, and it's only through his mistakes that he fits the image of clown. And now he goes the blackout, which is tragic and impactful enough to not just be humiliating, but also comes with a heavy dose of guilt. And I find it particularly thought-provoking that the series decided that the Lestro would not be the words of a human, but those of a robot.
You're a horrible failure! You can't do anything right!
To me, this can't help but seem like a conscious decision, and thus a bit cowardly. However, it's certain that this repeated humiliation caused Jestro quite a deep trauma, which we saw come back to haunt him in Season 1, Episode 5 and 6 too. Oh, and I'd like to highlight when he met with Jokes Knightley, who was quite an inspiration for him. And as that depressed guy describes how he lives on the streets and sometimes recalls his past by childish games, Jestro is like...
You still got it, Jokes!
It's just so ironic how blind he is for the problems he could understand the most, probably. Sorry, got distracted. So, this last incident on the graduation day provided the perfect opportunity for the Book of Monsters to reach Jestro in the palace, where sound waves travel in a very interesting and remarkably clear manner. And here comes one of the most interesting and wonderfully executed aspects of Jestro's character, his relationship with the Book of Monsters. Jestro, of course, craves praise and recognition, and the book exploits this to the fullest. All it takes is a kind word for the book to wrap Jestro around his finger. Yet, in reality, most of the time, he insults and degrades him. If Jestro has a good idea, the first thing the book does is invalidate him.
Doesn't Waterton pump water to a huge hunk of the kingdom, including the capital? We destroy that, we'd be done much sooner.
Wow, somebody has taught you how to think evil.
Or he doesn't even tell him to his face what he thinks.
And we want Oh! A bunch of weatherproof sealant for some, home renovation projects. We gotta weather seal the new hot tub.
Oh, good thinking.
To the book, Jestro is a tool. He doesn't view him as a partner, no matter what he does. And even if he has positive thoughts about him, he will never be an equal. Their dynamic is actually shockingly realistic, especially when you look at some common characteristics of emotional abuse. Unlike his partner, Jestro is deeply attached to the book, despite their comical arguments. He trusts him blindly and believes in him, no matter what happens. And it's worth to consider why the book was so much more effective at convincing Jestro than, say, Clay. Although that can be explained simply by the fact that he actually tried. Clay, from what we've seen of him, wasn't exactly an actively supportive friend, even though that would be pretty logical for his personality. He seems to believe in Jestro and tries to encourage him, but even his encouragement is immediately undermined for the sake of a joke.
That's the spirit. Is he gonna crash and burn? No, of course not. But probably. Yeah.
His support feels more like a duty he's fulfilling. And while his intentions are good, the book is much more purposeful than that. He offers Jestro an alternative rather than sending him back to the hell he's been through 1,000 times with a simple, "you'll be fine" attitude. What's more, this alternative not only earns him respect but also allows him to be good at something. All of this is accompanied by the fact that, from the very first moment, he completely isolated Jestro from the outside world. A wonderful example is Season 2, Episode 6, where Clay made a weak attempt to convince Jestro, and the book didn't even give Jestro time to respond. He answered for him instead.
Jestro, we used to be friends. Don't you remember?
What he remembers is that nobody ever stood up for him, except me. I'm standing by him and helping him be somebody.
If Jestro says a single word he doesn't like, he yells his head off on the spot. See the end of Knights of the Ram.
Nobody's ever really believed in me. Except Clay. And Merlok. Oh, also the king and...
No, they didn't. But I do, kid. Stick with me. You got a real bad future.
On the top of that, the knights played right into his hands. From the moment he summoned the first monster, Jestro had truly become the bad guy in their eyes. Let's recall how Clay described the scene.
It was Jestro and he had monsters in a magical book and he was gonna crush us!
No, he wasn't himself at all, or I don't know what happened to him, or he's not like that. No, Jestro wanted to destroy him. Not that Lance was any more torn by sympathy, but his Lance.
Seems like Jestro's history too.
That's it from this point. That's how we view him. In every conversation, the main focus is on Jestro. He's the villain. He has monsters. He has his own plans. The book is secondary to them, which makes their judgment of Jestro truly tragic. They didn't even try to convince him. Not even Clay. He only did it when he had no other choice, which doesn't exactly seem sincere. Looking through these, Jestro really had his reasons to turn against them. And it was this break in isolation that caused the book's downfall. After all, he persuaded Jestro to try entertaining people again. This was a rather reckless move on his part, if only because we saw in Season 2, Episode 4 that, deep down, Jestro has the willingness and desire to do so.
Hey, I used to work the king's birthday. Quite the event, you know. I wonder who's doing the entertaining now. We're all at the king's party. Waiting to be entertained. Like when I performed there last year. Oh, hey, when we attack, you think I could sneak in a quick bit or two? Huh?
No need for juggling, Jestro.
Back then, the book had shut him down, but in Season 2, Episode 8, he was explicitly supportive. In fact, he did it right alongside him. This likely only reinforced the illusion in Jestro that there was some kind of bond between them. And since he finally achieved success, thanks to the book, his confidence has grown as well. Then came the Knights and Clay, who finally deigned to act like a good friend. It's truly a shame he hadn't done so until now. And even here we see just how attached Jestro is to the book. As soon as the knights begin to praise him, one of the first things he does is say that the credit isn't all his. Specifically, he wants to share the recognition as an equal partner. Then he sees that someone has stolen the book and he completely breaks down. This is where it becomes truly clear just how dependent he is on the Book of Monsters. His monologue captures this perfectly.
You mean the Book of Monsters? Good riddance.
No. You don't understand. My book. I'm nothing without him.
Oh, tears of a clown. That's no joke.
I need my partner. I can't do anything without him. Oh, now I'm gonna fail like I always do.
Clay, meanwhile, encourages him to go out there without the book, because he's capable of it. And I can't even say he did this just because he realized it would be easier to defeat Jestro through psychological warfare. No, a little joke made it pretty clear that there was nothing like that involved.
But you have to do something for us.
Yeah, stop trying to take over the entire kingdom with your monsters.
Yes, that. But also, I want you to go out there on stage and be funny all by yourself.
What?
You can do this, Jestro.
What's more, here Jestro finally takes the stage alone. He gets off to a shaky start, but he finds his groove, and his confidence gradually grows. Now for his own sake, for the sake of his own performance, and of course because of the audience love. In fact, this perfectly frames not only the first 2 seasons, but also Jestro's character arc. And once he received genuine love from people, he no longer craved his villainous image. And here's a personal opinion. I don't think the Book of Betrayal had much to do with Jestro's change of heart. At most, it was the final push. Especially since Merlok later says he's completely free of evil. The book can't have that much power. So I really believe it was mostly because Jestro wanted to do the right thing and make amends for his mistakes. He did the same thing at the end of Season 2, Episode 9. And in fact, in Season 2, Episode 10 too. Because no matter how evil Jestro was, action was never his strong suit. So the fact that he didn't run off screaming, but instead led the knights through the traps, and even in the final battle tried to actually fight, this truly crowns his story and proves that he has changed, which was quite expected after all. If only because Jestro's backstory can very easily evoke sympathy in people, and he has this direct, slightly absent-minded style that makes him quite relatable and likable. And of course, there's no denying that his dialogues with the Book of Monsters are very well written. They really do make for an entertaining pair. I just think it's important not to forget what lies behind the humor, because that's much, much less funny. And now, the Book of Monsters. I really don't want to repeat myself with yapping about how brilliant his relationship with Jestro was. Instead, let's talk a bit more about this manipulator aspect of him in general. Cause sweet Jesus, they totally should have leaned much more into this trait of his. All they needed to do was to make him manipulate everyone. Like, he could have some relationship with the knights and affect their mind. And no, not like how he did it with Clay in Season 2, Episode 10. No, take that away from me. Instead, make their mutual trust shake. So at least they face bigger challenges as a team than who should be the leader? Moorington, or maybe Moorington. Look at his backstory. How great it would be if maybe he would have manipulated Merlok too, so they actually have a relationship other than one is good and one is bad. Heck, I don't even care if it's a letter-by-letter copy of the Dumbledore Grindelwald thing. It doesn't really matter, and look, we already have the Ariana plotline. And with this little addition, maybe Merlok would have got a deeper backstory. Though still, if he would be gone, I wouldn't cry him back, sorry. And there's that whole turning every wizard evil thing. Maybe he could have manipulated the wizards to take his side against Merlok, especially a certain someone who I'm pretty sure was meant to have a redemption arc too, because the writers don't have the guts to left Sir Moorington without a mama. But instead, he did it with the stupid forbidden powers. And I don't think I raged enough how this makes no sense. Even without turning people evil, the powers in themselves don't really care about logic. They're lazy, inconsistent, and so uncreative that it made me write a whole praise segment for the evil books. This will not be entered in the Book of Monsters criminal record. He doesn't really have anything to do with these. But I also don't understand why they couldn't make this trait more permanent. It would make him more unique in the ocean of cartoon villains, and he was already a manipulator indeed. Whatever, at least he was a good manipulator in season 1 and 2, where, as I firmly believe, he didn't even need a complex backstory yet. It was more than enough how they foreshadowed that he's monstrox, because by the standards of the series, it was great. For the first and last time, they hinted at something properly. I'm amazed. Like the lot of nostalgia, or his face when in season 1 episode 6, Lavaria said that Jestro can live up to monstrox greatness. That hurt him. I'd like to quietly note that they should have done that with Clay and Merlok in season 3 too. And just in general, season 1 episode 6 handled Monstrox's character pretty well. At the beginning of the series, we only knew that Merlok defeated the monsters, sometimes, somehow, somewhy. And then, here we hear about the Golden Castle. At first it may look like a snack for the older audience, but it turns out that they built a whole myth around it. Yet again, we can see how Nexo Knights not just uses things, but makes it part of the story completely. So, after Lance says, Golden Castle, Clay instantly expands it by saying,
Merlok defeated Monstrox in the original movie like in real history. Who would you play?
Yes, that's the first time they say Monstrox's name in the series. Expect if you're Hungarian, then you have to listen to his Hungarian name, which is Szörnyűksz. Because Szörny means monster. It soaks in sweat in English well enough, don't make it worse, please. Thank God from season 3 they changed it back to Monstrox. Best translator decision ever. Language rant over, let's go back to the Golden Castle. So, we got to hear the supposed to be intimidating villain's name, but what did exactly happen at the Golden Castle, you may ask? Well, Cut and the Book of Monsters tells you. This episode not just throws exposition at you, but it's actually reasoned. Because how could Clay miss out an opportunity to give a lecture, and Monstrox is nostalgic? And you also get to know how important this historical event was for those who live in this world. What a shame that this was the first and last time we saw properly presented exposition in Nexo Knights. And I don't know if you noticed, but here Merlok didn't even have to open his mouth. And wow, it not just worked, but I call it good. I like when Merlok shared the exposition. Could there be a connection here? And at the end of the season, the writers got into hinting so much that they done it even when there was no great context for it. Well, at least here they tried. I don't know why they stopped doing that later. In season 1 episode 9, the book sniffed out a new evil book and decided to keep it in secret, so when Jestro became uncertain, he could pull it out like a white card. Maybe the problem is with me, but it made no sense for him to keep the Book of Vengeance in secret. It was only there to make it even more evident that the Book of Monsters only uses Jestro, and he's ready to betray him anytime when it's more beneficial for him. Great! Without this I never would have guessed it. You know what worked? Season 2 episode 8. If you thought I told everything about this episode, then you still don't know how much I can talk about this show. Because there's that point towards the end of the episode where Jestro starts to think about if he really wants to be evil, and when the Book of Monsters realizes that he instantly says that,
What? What are you talking about? This was all just a step in the plan. Look, you're the chosen one.
It's so ridiculously obvious that he pulled this out of the nowhere, and Jestro believed it so fast. And then Monstrox enjoys the evil mastermind's role as long as he can, and I still don't understand what happened here, apart from the writers trying to write something daring and twisted, and then halfway through they decided that, you know what, we don't have the balls to don't make Clay perfect. Whatever, Monstrox was perfectly fine here. Each of his plans work. I think the betraying part would have been much better and exciting and surprising, and otherwise Clay would have never started a solo action in a universe where he's consistent. Looks like whining about Clay for 14 minutes wasn't enough for me, sorry. Back to the book, he is a great manipulator, but he's more than that? Yep. Starting with the fact that since Jestro isn't the cream of villains, everyone knows who's the real bad guy here. But he can't be the bad guy he can be, because he needs Jestro to believe that he's the superior. so he has to stay in the background more than he wants, and he's irritated by this as hell. The series basically limited its own main villain completely consciously, completely justifiably, and completely well written. It's a recurring thing that he's limited physically too, but he also lost control over the events many times. Just look how differently he acted when he didn't need it to play the mentor's role. And because of that limitation, he doesn't even need a complex backstory here, since we only get a fraction of what he's capable of. But also, with the evil books, the series defined evil in his own simple way. I have mixed feelings about the episodic structure, but considering that this is a kids' show, the evil books worked. Much better than the Forbidden Powers. If there's an evil book in the episode, most of the time they give a main theme, a lesson, and a conflict, which we can see both from the knights and the bad guys' perspective. Simple, but if it works, I can't say anything against it. And if not, I tell it anyway. One of the best ones was probably the Book of Chaos, because the book explains that chaos is only good if it serves you. And of course, when the Book of Monsters himself realized that greed is not good. I love it. And the evil aspect is also influenced by the fact that this is made for kids. As well as I think that with the characters, Nexo Knights could explore more deeper topics, I also think that the child-friendly plot points give much to its charm. Because yes, there's destroying and looting, but they can't emphasize it that much, like there's no oops, we killed most of the civils. Yeah, brutality isn't an option. Season 2 episode 6 is a great example where the main theme is cruelty. And yes, what they did in the hotel can be called cruel, but also, if it would be for people over 16, this would look much different. I think the series made very clever use of the limitation imposed by its child-friendly implementation, but I talk more about this regarding to the Grey Knight. But the Book of Monsters character also felt the need to be child-friendly. So they have to find new and new alternatives for being evil. If it's chili, it's chili. If it's flu, it's flu. He'll do whatever to get control over people. 'Cause yeah, that's his main goal most of the time. He was fascinated by the power of scripts because everyone has to follow them, and he also decided to dive into the world of stand-up comedy because he recognized how powerful a blind fan base is.
Did you see how he ruled his audience? He commanded their attention and loyalty.
Again, this fits perfectly with the manipulative nature of his. These unconventional solutions not just brought some variety into the slightly repetitive format, but also served with lots of comedy.
Listen, floppy hat boy, I want that comic book. I had all the other books in that series, and I want that special edition. Ooh, I bet it tastes so special.
However, what I liked most about the Book of Monsters is that he gives nicknames for everyone.
Joke boy!
Mostly something degrading. Apart from his monster's home, he probably named by himself. And we still have the bookkeeper as an exception, and I can totally see that he takes out his frustration on him, which is caused by him not having a human form. With these nicknames, he expresses contempt and deprives characters of their human dignity. A simple but effective way to show that he respects and values no one and considers himself completely superior. And there's only one exception. He calls Clay by his surname since the beginning of the series.
They're nothing! You wiped the floor of that Moorington guy!
And this small gesture tells you so much. That he takes Clay seriously. He sees him as a threat. He only calls him by a nickname twice. When they captured Clay in Season 1 Episode 9 and Season 2 Episode 6, where he was disarmed so couldn't mean a threat.
Your coconut must still be spinning, shiny boy. Let's say nighty-night to Mr. Aloha shirt.
But otherwise he never underestimates Clay. Yet again we can see who's the best knight. And in Seasons 3 and 4, he stopped calling him Moorington, which is simply outrageous. How did we get from Mr. Moorington to the other guy? It breaks my heart. Whatever, at least in the first 2 seasons, it was a great detail. And if we already talk about names, I have to mention that Nexo Knights as a whole handles this topic pretty well. Starting with the most evident and lazy part, every name is a speaking name. But the Book of Monsters is not the only one who gives nicknames. Aaron has a creative nickname for everyone who is closer to him. And he can give offensive ones if he really wants.
No! He called me all kinds of names like No-Whimp-Latte and Whimparella!
With that, we also saw how a nickname can hurt someone. And the Book of Monsters, being perfectly true to himself, instead of showing sympathy towards Whimparella, only says that
Whimparella. Oh, that's pretty good.
Also shows Clay's significance that he got the most nicknames from his friends. There's Izzy who explains really well how you must be able to identify with your name. There are times when they make jokes with the speaking names.
My name's Jorah Tightwad, not Jorah Spends-A-Lot.
And no matter what an absolute frightening disaster Wanda is, she also changed her name when she became evil, which was a simple but obvious position statement. The Grey Knight took this to a whole another level when he, as a good guy, started to use the Grey Knight name again, which he first got as a bad guy. But let's save the Grey Knight praise for later. Jestro also loved the thought to be Jestro, the evil. This is definitely a highlight of the series, since it's not just occurs a few times, but a permanent element in the 4 seasons. Going back to the original topic, I think the Book of Monsters wasn't just a great villain in season 1 and 2, but with his grumpy, sarcastic style, he was also really entertaining, and I wish they had continued his story in manner worthy of it. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've been waiting for! The proud of Nexo Knights! The Grey Knight! For me, it came really handy that this tier list treats Clay and the Grey Knight as different characters. Of course, since he's, well, Clay, I consider this, but I only need his base personality so the Grey Knight doesn't suffer any disadvantages of the mistakes which made Clay painfully wasted. That's much easier and fair, in my opinion. And if I'd have to consider Clay and the Grey Knight as a whole, oh boy, this wouldn't be that beautiful. I'll explain this too, but let's start at the very beginning, when monstrox brought him back to life. And he is one of my few complaints, cause no, Nexo Knights can't create a consistent magic system. I really love that every awakened character continued everything where they stopped, like the 3 brothers.
Various under a mountain? Like that would ever work?
They didn't even want to follow Monstrox at first, but Clay became evil with the lightning too. Doesn't make much sense, but now that I told this, I will calmly ignore it. And although at first it looks like he was a whole different person, he wasn't. He couldn't even deny that he's Clay. First, he defeated the knights easily, and yes, the granite body was a pretty great advantage, but also I'm pretty sure he could do that in human form too. Gosh, I wish we could have seen that at some point. And he was still a leader.
You gotta see this! Clay's leading the monsters to attack the Nexo Knights!
His bloody big ego also fits perfectly into the picture. Basically, we got a Clay who went off the rails completely. Because he was pretty arrogant at the first place. Just like as a hero, he firmly believed that he's the one who has to save the day and pose heroically in the sunset. Here he's 100% sure that he's the only one who can finish the knights. He just lost all his limits, both physically and morally. Until this point, he had humility. The starting point of his actions was the Knight's Code, and Season 4 made it pretty evident that this was the luck of the realm. And as he was unconditionally loyal to the king, he was loyal to Monstrox too. Knowing this, the whole master thing makes much more sense, even if it was pretty awkward for me. And we also got to see the importance of the Knight's Code in Season 4, Episode 3, and I really like that Lance was the one who had to remind Clay of this. Looks like he actually managed to remember something from those speeches. At the end of the day, where Clay reminded the most to his true self was this episode. Because here, well, he's sane. And yep, we also have Season 4, Episode 4, but regarding to the Grey Knight and kinda everything, this episode was the bottom of the barrel. It's like it's not even Clay. His body language, the way he talks, and how passive he is the whole time. He just does what he's told to. Like, where he would have let the control out of his hands. Never! They only followed others' plans. If they only gave the bare idea and Clay figured out the rest, or when he directly asked for a plan. I wish they would have spent a scene with explaining that Aaron will be the leader until Clay becomes human again, because without that it's so unbelievable that Clay didn't want that to be the leader instantly. This could have been so interesting. I mean, imagine how he would react if everyone agrees that he shouldn't lead them in this condition. At least at the end, they admitted that he's not a spy material. This should have been obvious simply because he's not a great actor either. What makes this nothing like Clay behavior so annoying here for me is that this episode focuses entirely on him. The others barely do anything. And just the writing of this episode is surprisingly terrible too. Like, they throw important information at us so randomly. Like...
You be the judge.
Was this really the best way to show us that Clay can destroy stone monsters with his bare hand? Really? Such a bizarre writing choice. I think it would have been much better to show this after the knights arrived. And maybe he could be surprised by this too. Maybe that way I wouldn't have the question why he didn't just simply destroy the gargoyles when he was caught. Gosh, I really don't like this episode. At least the meeting with Ruina part wasn't that problematic from his perspective.
Come on! I got some people I want you to meet.
Finally, he reacts to something. But this episode had another important job apart from hinting at their relationship. Showing how the normal Clay becomes an unleashed killing machine. This episode performed terribly in this aspect too. Because Clay's wild slashing at the end was quite unexpected for me. Although I think in an evil environment, it's not that hard to find a good reason for aggression. That way, the change in season for episode 5 was still pretty sharp. But at least it can show well how drastic this change was. So the Grey Knight chops the rocks without thinking, but he has a sane moment. And I think it's really worth to note what are the situations where he pulls the handbrake. The first time was when he treated Robin with kid gloves in season 4 episode 2, which probably happened because the series and the Grey Knight has to stay child-friendly, but still, it happened. And here it was his friend's opinion what prompted him to self-criticism. How much is this self-criticism worth is another question. But hey, we got a hint at Fletcher. Although without the book, you hardly could guess that it's him. Or even with the book. Even if this hint was totally for the audience, because we never saw Clay think about this ever again. But Fletch here, Fletch there, during these big meditations, Clay found the answer. The reason why he fights like he's running out of time is that he can't accept himself and his stone body. Could have they emphasized this a bit better before? Yes. Do I think it's a big problem? Nope. I'm just happy that they came up with something deep like this, I swear. And he didn't stop here, cause he decided that he will use his power to defeat every enemy. Until this point, the Knight's Code was the origo of Clay's actions. If we remove this from the formula, Clay's entire belief system, and with it, his entire personality collapses like a pile of pebbles. Yep, Nexo Knights used symbolism here, and oh boy, I wish they've done it so much sooner. And we should take a look at his base personality again. Cause what is left is not much. Mostly his arrogance. That's a lot less than where we started. So this is the Clay Moorington who doesn't embody the ideal of chivalry, who hasn't devoted his entire life to the code and service. What could I say? It's not a positive picture. Yet again we can see how lucky everyone was with his dedication. And the blind following of the Knight's Code in itself arises a few questions. How conscious was he while reading? Making this question a bit more specific. Is the Knight's Code good because it matches Clay's value system? Or Clay's value system is good because it matches with the codes? If the code would approve war crimes or something, would Clay approve it too? You may say, no, of course not, but how could we know? He never went against it. This may seem a harsh example, but has to emphasize how dangerous his dedication and loyalty can be. And again, he could and should learn to exist without the code. Anyway, I'd really like to see how he became such a great fan of this. Because in the Knights of the Realm, we already saw a pretty enthusiastic Clay. And yes, I know his father is said to be a knight, but that's far from enough for me. Knighthood can mean so much to someone, and it can manifest in many ways: behavior, motivation, attitude. So without context, this information is useless in my eyes. But moving on, yep, at this point the Knight's Code is totally out of the picture. No more teamwork, so Clay also lost his leading ambitions. There's no dignity or chivalry, no more complex strategies. And with this, Clay's martial arts skills have also been reduced to the level of cutting up everything that gets in his way. What only left is the evil what should be destroyed. Though, let's be honest, he hardly would have stopped after he dealt with the bad guys. Apart from all of this, he handled this self-acceptance very well. With a slight change of perspective, he not just accepted his stone body, but made it part of his personality completely.
You changed your whole personality.
Dude, I've always worn Gucci.
Gucci isn't a personality.
Yo, you can't just attack an entire culture like that, man.
Thanks to this granite culture, the beginning of Season 4, Episode 7 is a concentrated second-hand embarrassment. But I like to view it as a perfect way to show how brutal his mental fever dream is. Jesus, I'd like to bury myself during most of his lines as a viewer, so I can imagine what his friends felt. Well, besides fear, they literally say that they don't think it's safe to stay alone with him. Brilliant and scary at the same time. And totally reasonable, I might add. The only thing we needed was to get to know what happened in Season 4, Episode 1. Then the Grey Knight definitely would have gladly slaughtered them. Desecration seems a fine reason. Though the human Clay would have killed himself instead, if you ask me. I can't believe I can talk about desecration regarding to Nexo Knights without kidding. Moving on from that crime against good taste, let's take a look how the Grey Knight treats others. Well, he disregards his peers, with Aaron at the forefront. He respects the king, but I highly doubt that he would take an order from him. He treats Eva a bit better, but she is underage. He also respectful towards Merlok, even if he has no intention to listen to him. At least we slightly see that they are supposed to be close, although I think they had way too little interactions in Season 4. That was the point where Merlok started to feel it too, that maybe he screwed things up a bit. Of course, it wasn't built up at all, because they never spoke about Ruina. From Clay's side, it's quite understandable, since it must be really hard for him to admit that he got defeated 2 times. But it seems like the others haven't noticed anything, so the only reason why Merlok started to worry about Ruina was that the plot needed it. Great! Though I can see why he would want to confess it for Macy, but let's say because she has the EQ monopoly. But before they let the cat out of the bag, there's a false alarm. And once again, his self-control forces him to stop. And the reason? He got scared. He knew that he'll meet Ruina if he goes further. He found a reason, an excuse to turn back. But the next time, he hasn't hesitated for a minute. At this point, we can say that the Grey Knight became morally grey. Even though he still fights against the evil. The series makes it really clear that this in itself isn't enough. And I'm more than satisfied with this message. Although it is a bit interesting that this message was formulated in relation to Clay, it's undeniably well executed. And after this, I'm not willing to accept anyone saying that you can't accept anything deep from Nexo Knights. And yet, the cornerstone of Nexo Knights' story is that huge logical blunder that the knights don't follow the monsters after they get defeated and don't try to attack Jestro directly. And yes, this makes 0 sense, but they treat it as evidence. And Season 4 made me love this aspect, because the Grey Knight broke these quasi-norms, which shocks every knight, and even monstrox and jestro got pretty frightened. I think that's the most creative way to show brutality while staying child-friendly. You just have to lower the expectations. Because here what the Grey Knight does is some kind of war crime in everyone's eyes. Especially if we think about what values did Clay live by. As a human, he wouldn't even thought to slice up Jestro. Though he had the chance. Here he hesitated a bit too, but not for long. Jestro's luck is that Ruina arrives and she is the absolute priority for Clay. She pissed him off well enough in the past 3 episodes, so now the Grey Knight throws himself at her without hesitation. Literally. If you look closely, here even the always confident witch got scared. Funny. And although from Ruina's perspective this conversation was rather meaningless, we absolutely can't tell this about Clay. I won't say that this is the best written dialogue ever, because it's not even close, but it has one aspect that I can really appreciate. It was systematically designed to hurt Clay as much as possible. First, she made him question his relationship with Merlok, then draws attention to their relationship, and even the thought of it freaks Clay out. And as the coup de grace, she says,
You never should have been a knight.
Bam! She covered all the sensitive points of Clay. Lifelong trauma guaranteed. And we got a Star Wars reference, because it wouldn't be the same without this. So Clay's outburst is understandable, given that he's been through an emotionally draining 8-sentence conversation. Although I still think that if Ruina would have had any role apart from terrorizing Clay, and she would have got a personality, this revelation would have hit much harder for Clay and for the viewers too. Ignoring the question that how the other knights hasn't seen or heard anything from this, we got back to the fortress. Seeing the Grey Knight without a helmet must have been a wow moment from everyone. If for no other reason than because it doesn't make much sense this way. But at least this way, we can see him from a fresh perspective. The lack of helmet makes him more human-like, and it also can symbolize vulnerability, defenselessness, and the give up of the fight. I still can't believe it took them 4 seasons to use some symbolism. Or more like, I can't believe that they do it in the first place. Maybe I'm just making it up. Well, I'm ready to be delusional for a bit. Anyway, we could see yet again a sharp change in his behavior. And since the very first watch, I'm wondering what went down behind the curtains and how he went from raging fury to silent anger. The initial stubborn denial is now a thing of the past. A little thinking was enough to make him question the wizard's honesty. Although with this, I have one big problem, and nope, it's not Clay's fault, but what a surprise, it's Ruina's. And that's that she's more poorly written than the novels I wrote for Wattpad at age 12. Because the only way they showed that Clay is connected to Ruina was through Ruina. She went to him and told him stuff. There should have been much more and more subtle signs too, preferably from season 3. Here, in theory, Clay should be putting together the many small pieces of the puzzle. Everything should make perfect sense, but it can't, because his only source is Ruina herself. And gosh, she can say whatever she wants. Yeah, here she said the truth, but how could Clay know that? And then Merlok comes and tells everything we already knew. Stunning. At least he could have said some plus information, a reason, anything.
Yes, that is correct. You have a powerful ability with magic, Clay. Perhaps even more powerful than your mother. Or even myself.
But for Clay, the confession is more than enough to lose control. And this is the first time we saw him using magic. Well, if you don't count everything he did as the Grey Knight as magic. I personally don't, but I consider this an open question. And it scares him, just as it should. Here I get everything but I missed from the human Clay's behavior. He questions his identity, everything. This twist simply begs for this inner conflict, and it could lift Clay's character to a whole different level. And then he left in his own, and he kinda gets back to the same point where he was in season 4 episode 5, but he ends up with a whole different conclusion. And the reasons, always the reasons. Here, he got scared by himself. He saw how strong he is, how unable he is to control it, just like his actions, and that this makes him dangerous for everyone. And he was right. I think his decision to imprison himself was the most faithful to Clay. Not even mentioning what he did at the end of the episode. It's Really interesting how Macy begs for an explanation, but he refuses to give one. Maybe because admitting the truth hurts him just as much. What makes this scene really sad is that they are both so stubborn, and both because they want the best for each other. So, let's list again what made the Grey Knight stop at some point. Morality, hurting children because we don't need another Anakin scene. The Knight's Code, friendship, fear from the truth, morality, cutting up a clumsy clown, and again, a friend. This becomes even deeper when we realize that for Clay, his team was his family essentially, because he doesn't have anyone else. Finally, a self-sacrifice which really hits and actually makes sense. They finally managed to pull it off. Though I will repeat it till my last breath, that Clay should have been the one who downloads the Nexo power to Macy, not Merlok. This still doesn't make sense either, but I'm ready to let go if it means that I can see a blue Nexo power. It would have been so cool, and it's still intended to be from Clay anyway, because the power disappears the moment Clay turns back to stone. I will never be able to let this go. That's the only thing I can think ever since I first saw this episode. Let's sum up the Grey Knight a bit. The strong point of his character is that with him, the episodic structure has been broken, and he developed from episode to episode. This complex development is perhaps the most remarkable in the entire series, so it's really hard to ask me a question that highlights his biggest problem. What was the need for it? What plus did it add to Clay? In part 3, I pointed out many aspects of him which could be explored, and somehow the public menace psychopath wasn't among them. Maybe because the stuff about Ruina would hit much harder? No way. I'm sure the Clay who sleeps and wakes with the code would be much more shaken by having an evil mother. Okay, but then how could he be mad at Merlok? Without a problem. As I briefly mentioned it at some point, we never really saw Clay mad before as a human. Even when he was really annoyed, he only released his tension on a plant. If a character who always calm becomes so angry, he starts smashing and breaking things, you know that something really serious happened. From the Grey Knight, it wasn't surprising at all. Everyone knew that this will happen at some point. That way, we don't have the contradiction that Merlok plays the martyr and tells his magic would turn Clay evil, and then after he becomes human, Clay has no anger issues. Without the Grey Knight, he would become insane from his magic as a human, and he could spend the rest of the time with fearing his great power. But this is a whole new concept for Nexo Knights. Oh, so they made a whole spin-off book based on that concept? Then never mind. I have an idea which seems naive, but also could easily resolve this pointlessness. I don't know how realistic is this, and the end of season 4 made no intention to show something like that. But I really want to believe that for Clay, this Grey Knight era would be a huge emotional burden. 'Cause what is his greatest fear? To fail as a knight. And he totally did that here. He hurt innocents and his friends. Knowing all of this, Clay could have every right to hate himself and be afraid to become evil again, or become like his mother. I really, really want to believe that this would have happened in season 5, even if that one episode description doesn't support this theory. But hope dies last. We could never know. So in itself, this is definitely isn't a reason to put the Grey Knight lower. And I really don't want to. Even if it didn't really serve Clay's character, it sure served the story. It brought in a new conflict, much more thrill and depth, and proved that yes, Nexo Knights can write great character arcs. And you know what shows perfectly how well written he was? That this one character managed to hide from everyone that season 4 has such a terrible writing that it hurts. Dare I say, it's the worst written season. He really carried this whole season on his shoulders by himself. I have to give him that. And we're done. Every single character analyzed in such unnecessary detail. I really enjoyed this whole project with every single part of it, from the Hungarian script through the translation, the recording, the editing. I spent almost 1 year with making this, and I'm thankful every day that on that, sadly I don't remember which day, I procrastinated so much I started to write this. Now I'm done, but I still have topics to discover, and yes, I can still talk more about Nexo Knights. I still have so much to say, but for now this should be enough. Thank you for watching. If you have any thoughts, make sure to let me know, and... Oh! You say I left out 3 characters? Herb Herbertson, Alice Squires, and Jürgen von Stroheim? Well, they can't really fit into any category. They way too good to be absolute, okay? But to rank them as masterpiece seems a bit of a stretch. They simply too unique for this, and that's not a problem, because I'll talk plenty about them next time, so stay tuned!